We have a second microphone. All right, we are going to go ahead and get started because if nothing else, we want to let our authors go get some dinner. So welcome to Innovators Hall here at Space for Grace. This is our first ABHMS Spotlight exhibit on the Center for Continuous Learning, ABHMS's newest ministry of practical mission education. I am the director, Reverend Rebecca Irwin-Deal, and I am here with Judson Press authors, G. Travis Norval, author of Church on the Move, and Willard W.C. Ashley Sr., author of New Rules for Radicals, TNT for Faith-Based Leaders, both of which are available for sale now in the Judson Press bookstore. And we are going to have a conversation today with these two distinguished authors and ministry leaders about questions of how it is we can engage faith formation in a new generation for maximum social impact for generations that are really interested in having faith outside of church walls. So I'm going to start by asking Dr. Ashley, in your book, New Rules for Radicals, you mentioned 3 cultures of responses to public challenges, and you name them as service, mobilizing, and organizing. Can you briefly describe or define each of these, service, mobilizing, and organizing?
So first, I want to say thank you for allowing me to come and be part of this conversation. And secondly, I think they're trying to pass you the mic. Okay. and then secondly, I appreciate this conference. So one of the reasons that the book came into existence was because as faith-based leaders, be it ordained or lay leadership, when we see something happen, we want to be responsive, right? That's what we were taught. And so usually we are involved in service. We have a daycare center. We do a feeding program. We reach out to the homeless. And those are necessary. I mean, I do service. I'm a psychoanalyst on top of being a pastor, so that's very necessary. However, you can't stop there. So then something happens like George Floyd, and people mobilize. And you see thousands of people from all over, and they're in their different geographies, and they're mobilizing. Let's go do something. Let's protest. But then it stops there. And so to organize means after providing service, after the mobilization and 1,000 people show up and protest, how do you get the attention of the decision makers to make a change? And it doesn't happen unless you organize it.
Thank you. That's very helpful to hear that kind of progression and how it's kind of a deepening level of engagement, perhaps. Now, I could imagine that different people of faith will feel different levels of call to these kinds of responses, right? So, Pastor Norval, you're pastor of a local church, and in your book, Church on the Move, you share some really creative ideas about getting congregations involved in their communities, maybe not mobilizing as such, but on the move. So, can you tell us about at least one of those and how it fits into one of these 3 cultures? How would you align it with one of these 3 cultures?
Yeah, sure. Probably on the, probably on the organized part, on the service part. So, I did a series of interviews. I wanted to do Judson Church was going to turn 110, and my idea was to do 110 one-on-one interviews with members of the community. I made it to about 42 or 67, depends on how you count the people that I did. After all those interviews, we had it at the same coffee shop, same seat, and I asked people kind of 4 basic questions. And they were, do you know anything about Judson Church? And nobody did. I asked them, could you give me directions to Judson Church? And they couldn't. I said, if you had a soapbox and you could tell a church whatever it should be doing, what would you tell it to do? And then 4th, I just asked, what keeps you up at night? And we found, 3 responses that were pretty much consistent through all those. And one was people were worried about housing. They were worried about, people experiencing homelessness in the community. They were worried about being priced out of their own homes. They were worried about, I can't live here anymore. The second one was mental health. They just said, I go to bed every night crying about my kids and worried about them. And the third one was loneliness. They just said, I'm just tired of being lonely. So, we try to really about the service part. I mean, we have extra rooms. We now have counselors that, provide counseling center for the neighborhood. Loneliness, we try to do as many food programs as we can, and I encourage people to go out on Meals on Wheels just to go see who's in the community. And then, that's how we're trying to operate. And we ask people, if you have an empty room in your house, will you house somebody? Even if it's just for an overnight or a week.
That's great. I love that you moved out into the community to ask the questions about the felt needs. What are people really looking for? And then you responded to those needs. So I want to ask both of you, how have you seen these ministries of response really contribute to forming the faith of God's people? We tend to think of these activities as being outward oriented, but we also see the ways in which serving others, mobilizing, organizing on behalf of others' needs also does something to who we are as God's people. So I was wondering if you could speak to how have you seen it change people, members of your congregation? How have you seen it transform people who get involved in mobilizing and organizing?
You want me?
Okay. So all three come together in New York City following 9/11. We're doing service, we're mobilizing, and we're organizing. And so there's a meeting that takes place September 12th of church leaders in the New York metropolitan area. And Margaret Kornfeld from Judson Memorial had a book out called Cultivating Wholeness. And she was one of the consultants. And we're doing all this planning about what clergy are going to do and around pastoral care. And Margaret says, excuse me, there's an Assumption graduate school person that clergy do visits. Yeah, exactly. Ouch. And I said, you're right. Some do, and some don't, and we're glad they don't, because they're not good at it. I'm sorry, I said
no
look,
harm.
So you're right. So we changed the term from clergy to caregivers, and it is more inclusive, and it includes lay leadership. It also includes professionals who may or may not go to church, but they want to help. And so we end up bringing a whole group of mental health people who have some kind of misguided Freudian stuff about church being, okay, whatever. But they want to participate. So they brought their sense of service to the table. Yes. And they ended up changing them. And so one of my mentors is the late Phyllis Harrison Ross, who was considered the mother of black psychiatry. And she went to Ethical Culture Society. And she says, I used to be a Baptist, but now I'm a humanist, and, this ethical thing. Right. Yes. Before she passed away, though, she said at her deathbed in Mount Sinai, she says, every morning I wake up and I ask God, what do you want me to do today?
That's a transformation.
That's a transformation.
Yeah. Wow. For me, it started with stories that I would tell the congregation. So, I encourage everyone to walk, bike, or take public transit. And, a church like Judson in Minneapolis, it thinks highly of itself, and probably rightfully so. And we talk a lot about social justice, but how much time are we really spending with the people with their backs against the wall and the poor? Right. And I realized that people weren't, and so I just started telling stories every week. But the people I meet on the bus, the people I meet on the street, the people I'm biking with, and those stories just start to take a life of their own. Yeah. And we have a new metric now at Judson. It's not how many people go to work. How many people go to worship on Sunday. It's how many dogs did you meet this week. So that just proves that you're out in the community, that you're talking and walking, and you're meeting people along the way. And I've seen that kind of change the outlook a little bit more. Not as inward focused and more outward focused community. Yeah.
So I'm thinking that as we train more people to do pastoral care, then you can start a new metric with how many cats did you meet? So it's not just about the dog people. Cat person,
Nothing
yeah.
against cat people, but I'm a dog person, yeah, so yeah.
And you don't see that many cats being walked, right?
Yeah,
So-
no, I have actually, yeah. You can actually, sorry, everyone, I just got to put a plug for this. You can come to Minneapolis the last week of October, and there is a cat tour. There's a neighborhood cat tour. Everybody brings their cats out onto the porch, and you get to meet them, and they tell the names and a little bit about them, yeah.
Okay, that would be a little hazardous in my Philly neighborhood where half of the cats are feral. But that's great, thank you. I want to make sure we have time for our audience to ask questions. So I'm going to hand my microphone to Jennifer, my colleague Jennifer Sanborn, and she is going to bring you the microphone if you have questions for our authors.
This is like after you give a lecture in the seminary, and you ask the students, and they look at you like, was it that great, or did we blow you away? Like, what happened here? Right. Man,
So
Doc, you were deep.
I'm always a good plug with a question, and that's the gift of being handed the microphone. But I know that by virtue of you both being Judson Press authors and having Judson Press editor and publisher here, that a lot of people ask that question. Could my ministry be a book? Is there something that I'm learning that I could convey? So I'm just interested in your process of kind of shifting from your theological, practical theological stance into actually writing that and conveying that to others.
Absolutely. So for me, I didn't wake up saying, yeah, I want to write a book. I actually, first time I had a book, I was trying to find a cheat sheet because I was asked to speak someplace. I was like, I need the cheat sheet. And they said, they don't have one. I says, why? They says, you didn't write it. I'm like, come on, I have an ego, but it's not that big. Where's the cheat sheet? They're going, really? There's no cheat sheet. You didn't write it. And I realized they were correct. And so I wrote the cheat sheet, so to speak. And then once you do the first one, you're like, wow, I can do this. So then when it came time to do Judson Press, I had this incredible journey. I'll say it real short. I had 5 eye surgeries. And so I had to contract someplace else, and they canceled it because I couldn't meet the deadline. And my ophthalmologist said, here's the deal. You either keep your eye or write the book. Okay, I guess I'm keeping my eye. So I come in, Judson Press said, hey, we love what you're doing. Please, let's do this together. And we did. And it's been wonderful. But here we go again. New rules for radicals. Ooh, Saul Alinsky did rules for radicals. I have an ego, but I don't know if it's that big. And so that's a big, giant step. So I spoke to the folks that were his disciples, so to speak. And it says, we're fine with it. You've earned the right to write about what you want to write about. And you've been with us for a couple of decades, so we're comfortable. So here we are.
Yeah, wow. When I was in 8th grade, my great aunt bought a VCR and didn't know how to use it. And so I was recruited by the family to go and instruct her how to use her VCR. And I wrote a book, right? I wrote her a page-by-page manual of how to write a book. And then I realized, really, a church on the move, it's just an updated version of the VCR manual. Yeah, I mean, it's a recipe book. Yeah.
And I understand it's literally a recipe book, correct?
It is literally a recipe book.
So what's your favorite in there? I realize we're eating restaurant food this week, but what page should we turn to have your
the Great
favorite?
Nut Cookie is my favorite. It's also called an old man cookie. That's what my kids call it. So, yeah, I mean, I like grape nuts. So
The old man cookie. Any other audience questions?
I'm wondering, to what extent do the ideas that you've employed to the book, or in the books, can they be picked up and implied in other cultural contexts? So I think about your situation in Minneapolis. Can you pick that up and use it in New England? Can you use it in New York City? I'm just wondering if you can speak to context a little bit.
So in the book, we have 8 universals. They're not going to name all 8, but I can name some of them. And one of them is there you go. And one of them is creativity. You can take creativity and export that anywhere and fit your context. One of the other main points is competence. And competence, you can export, import, you can take it anywhere, because again, the goal of being competent is doing your research, and that's contextual. And saying that in your context, do your research. Don't go out there and say, I'm going to storm the castle and don't know what you're up against. Don't have any appreciation. So one of the things that I love about people that are competent in this kind of work is when you go before the governor and say, we want to do X, Y, and Z, they say, we can't afford it. It's interesting because on line 64 in the budget hasn't been spent yet. And they look at you like, how did you know that? It's a public document. I went and looked it up. I did my research. And I think the third point that's helpful from the book talks about courage. You can't teach that in seminary, but you need to have courage. Because if you're going to go up against City Hall, they're going to throw at your head 100-mile-an-hour fastballs and hope they hit you. So if you can't handle the comeback, don't do this.
I like to think that it could be anywhere, right? I mean, when I was coming here, I got a cab. I don't like to use Uber or Lyft. It's kind of like getting married with a universal life minister. I mean, there's been no, at least yeah. So the person I'm riding the cab, we started talking. He's from Ethiopia, but he spent about 10 years in a refugee camp in Kenya. And what do we talk about? Bicycles. I just started talking about bicycles and he was like, look, I haven't ridden a bike since I've been in America, but I rode a bike every day in Kenya in the camps, and we talked a little bit about that. Now, that doesn't mean that my book could apply in a refugee camp in Kenya, but the whole point of it is we all have to move. We all have to get from A to B, and how do we transit? And for me, the walking, biking, and public transit is just a metaphor for how you move in the community. And I think the less that we can do it in a car, the better. So where can we do that? Wherever we are. It doesn't mean every trip like that, but can you do some of it like that? And when I went back to see my mom a few months ago, I was in West Virginia in the Kanawha Valley, and all of a sudden I realized this is the perfect place for my book. Now no one there thought that, but I did. But I mean, like, you can take the bus from my mom's house in St. Albans for $2.50. And you can take the bus 40 miles to Montgomery in Kanawha County, which is where Dr. Evans, where he played football at West Virginia Tech, another Judson Press author. I mean, where else can you do that? This is a perfect place for it. So, I mean, I think you can.
Well, and I figure if you can bike in Minneapolis in the winter, you can probably contextualize this anywhere.
Yeah. That's where courage.
That's where the courage comes in.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm also thinking about the ways in which, how would those coffee shop conversations be different now because of the ways that you have mobilized, gotten your church on the move in these service projects? And do you have folks in your congregation talking with folks in the community about what you might be able to do to take this to City Hall, to say, we can't do it as one church to provide for those who don't have homes or who don't have food security? So I'm just thinking about the ways that with creativity and courage and connecting with other people who have other competencies, there are ways to kind of even deepen that engagement to really transform additional lives. Maybe folks outside of the church, right?
Yeah.
But who then are transformed by that relationship. Just really exciting stuff that you're talking about. I really appreciate that. Any last words for us?
I would just say, when you're out moving around, you don't fall into that that dichotomy that there's a theology of scarcity out there, right? I mean, there's human beings with hearts and minds and bodies. It's abundance everywhere. Trust it.
I would just say that organizing is scary because it's not a quick fix. It involves hard work, and sometimes it takes longer than we'd like in this world of instant everything. But if you want to get results done, it's going to involve commitment. It's the fourth piece, and being able to commit to what it takes to get this done. And I celebrate. This doesn't happen for everybody. It took us 30 years, but we were able to break ground for 8,000 homes a third of those 8,000 homes are affordable.
Wow. Wow.
That's
Is
what the
worth
book talks
celebrating.
about, how you can make that happen.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ashley. Pastor, oh, yes, please.
What I love about Center for Continuous Learning events is that it's often the after conversation that enriches, so we always have room for one more question.
Well, thank you for letting me make a comment and then a comment, okay? My name is Jerry Kane, JC. I go into the firehouse subs in my place. I order my firehouse sub, and they say it's JC. They know it's for JC.
Okay.
But I've been going in there for so many years. They know I'm the pastor. They now say it's Jesus Christ. And so when my order is ready, they call out Jesus Christ. Now, secondly, is that I'm very interested in the legacy of the Judsons. And again, I'm in contact with your historian. And you did mention a little caveat there of the Judson Memorial Church. Now, I'll tell my last story and quit. But my last story is going into the firehouse subs, and they call out, "Okay, Jesus Christ, your order's ready." So I get my order. And a lady says, "Oh, are you a pastor?" And I said, "Well, yeah, we're to Grace Baptist Church." And she said, "My mother used to go there. She's 101 years old. Would you come visit her?" So I did this last Sunday. Excuse me, this is right here in Kansas City, so it's a little bit rich. And so I went, and she's 101, laying on her hospice bed, and I start quoting Psalm 23. And she opens her eyes and finishes it. And I go to John 14. In my Father's house are many mansions. She finishes it. And I go to John 3:16. She finishes it all the way through. And the two daughters that are there and the caregiver are overwhelmed by that. But I stumbled into what you're talking about by accident. And there's something out there about ministry in the community that way, regardless of what your initials are or how that works.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kane. Thank you all for being here with us. Really appreciate your presence. And again, the books are available in the Judson Press bookstore. You might be able to catch the authors one last time for a signature if you like. Thank you so much. God bless you. Enjoy the rest of your evening and the week. Thank you for having so much fun with this.